Hey again, everybody. Jeremy Plonk here with First Bet and Express Bet, and welcome in to the weekly It's Official podcast. Each Tuesday, we tackle 5 hot topics in horse racing, and there's a lot buzzing right now. It's kind of a bridge week, the Travers in the rearview mirror, but when you look through the windshield, we still have the Pacific Classic coming up this weekend. The unofficial end of summer, if you will, Labor Day weekend rolls through the hopeful on Monday at Saratoga. A lot yet for the 2-year-olds this summer before they close up shop at Saratoga with the hopeful, at Del Mar with the Del Mar Futurity, and a lot to talk about in the Breeders' Cup Classic division. And we'll talk a lot about Breeders' Cup now, and you say, well, it's only summer. Breeders' Cup is Halloween, but the plan for a lot of these horses that we've seen in the past few weeks is to train up to the Breeders' Cup. So it might be the last time we've seen some of the biggest names in racing until they hit the championships at Del Mar coming up at the end of October. As we do each and every week here on the podcast, we're going to lead things off with the Goosebump Award. This was one that Jeff instituted at the beginning of 2025. We'll kick off the podcast with the horse or performance last week that got us most excited, got us up out of our seat, got the hair standing up on our arms. The Goosebumps indeed this week go to not one but 2 runners. It was a race where one of them had to win, but there was a hard luck loser in the personal ensign. Thorpedo Anna and Darth Vader. The force was with them at Saratoga.
11-1. Thorpedo Anna turns for home with Darth Vader in hot pursuit. A length back second. These two past the 8th pole together. Brian Hernandez Jr. riding for his life on Thorpedo Anna, trying to fend off this huge bid from Darth Vader. It's Thorpedo Anna. Darth Vader's coming at her. Thorpedo Anna. Darth Vader. Here's the line. Photo finish. Thorpedo Anna and Darth Vader hit the wire together in the personal ensign.
There were a lot of mouths agape going to the photo finish camera there, as you saw on the feed from Fox and the call from Frank Miramati. The race of the week, no doubt, in terms of excitement. The personal ensign, when you get 2 superstars like that, there were 5 Grade 1 winners in the personal ensign field, none greater than Thorpedo Anna. She was once again favored, and she's now 12 for 15 lifetime, and she got the nose victory here. Almost a little retribution for losing to Travers last year by a head when she took on the boys against Fierceness in that one. She got her photo finish victory under the spires there at Saratoga, the old spires, and it was really a performance that Thorpedo Anna needed, I think, because she has the resume, but she had that blemish on her record back in the La Troyenne Stakes in May at Churchill Downs on Oaks Derby weekend, where people started to wonder, myself included, was she over the top? I didn't think she was as good this year as she was last year. I didn't think she trained particularly great coming up into the personal ensign stakes. In fact, I took a shot to beat her last week and thought maybe Randomized could wire the field. Randomized chucked in the towel after about 7 furlongs. Thorpedo Anna just kept going, and this was her best performance of 2025, and it's probably her best performance since the Breeders' Cup Distaff last year when she won it wire to wire over Raging Sea. She's a little more tactical than she was in her 3-year-old season, and she can just kind of sit, pounce, and go when she needs to, and she'll put in a dogfight. So this was a really impressive performance for Thorpedo Anna. That sets her back up to go back to Del Mar for a title defense in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Kenny McPeak says that might be it for her. Maybe we would see her in the Spinster at Keeneland, but she may train up to the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Look, the timing between races is good for her. She had 2 months off coming into the personal ensign, and she really responded. This was a tough effort, a dogfight against Darth Vader. I think she'll need the time for it. If she trains up to the Breeders' Cup Distaff, might be the best way to go for her. Remember, the poor effort she had was on short rest earlier this year in the La Troyenne. That race was May 2nd, just after the April 12th apple blossom. So they basically came back on like 20 days rest in the one race where she ran terribly. I don't necessarily want to put a prep for her 4 or 5 weeks in front of the Breeders' Cup if you don't have to. I think she could probably train up to it and be just as effective. Thorpedo Anna, this week's Goosebump Award winner, and a tip of the cap. Nice job by Darth Vader. She just continues to outrun her odds in some of these big races around the country and just keeps firing every single time. She's a really good addition to the Distaff division. But Thorpedo Anna, she's the queen of the Distaff, and she'll have a chance to defend her title, health permitting, for the Breeders' Cup coming up in late October. Second topic this week as we go from Thorpedo Anna's most exciting performance to the most dominant performance. What did we learn from the Travers Stakes? Everybody knew Sovereignty was going to be almost impossible to beat in the Travers, just against 4 rivals. After all, he was coming off wins in the Kentucky Derby, the Belmont, and the Jim Dandy. No horse had ever won those 4 races in a row in the Travers. Did it get exciting at all? Not so much. It was just a matter of the margin. Sovereignty dominant at Saratoga. Let's go back and take a look and try to figure out what we learned from the Midsummer Derby.
With those big, powerful strides, Bracket Buster on the inside, and Sovereignty and Bracket Buster a long way back to Magnitude in third. They're in the final furlong, and we are witnessing greatness. Sovereignty pouring it on. And for the first time since 1995, we have a Kentucky Derby, Belmont, and DraftKings Travers winner as Sovereignty rolls home to win by more than 8 lengths. Congratulations to Belmont. There's your Travers.
Official margin of victory, 10 lengths in the Travers Stakes for Sovereignty. And as Frank Miramati mentioned, first horse since 1995 to win the big 3 there. When you look at New York, along with the Kentucky Derby, the Belmont, and the Travers, that being Thunder Gulch back in 1995. And no horse that also added the Jim Dandy in between those, as we saw with Sovereignty. So what did we learn from the Travers Stakes? A 10-length victory against just 4 rivals, but a good 2 minutes and 4/5 time. In fact, a 24 3 final quarter mile in which he didn't have to lay his belly down. Travers winner. Sovereignty just opened up with each stride throughout the lane. A really good effort for him. And it was the plan, right? And we talked about this with some critique to it, going from the Derby to the Preakness and how they wanted to skip the Preakness and slough off the Triple Crown. Not necessarily good for business and not necessarily good for the industry, but for this particular horse, they put a plan together that said no Preakness. We're going to point to the Belmont and we're going to point to the Travers, and then they used the Jim Dandy as the prep for the Travers. So how important was the Travers to their plan? They went with a prep race to make sure he was ready. And as we mentioned, going into the Travers Stakes, he wasn't fully cranked in that victory when he won over Baeza in the Jim Dandy, but he did it comfortably enough. He was cranked for this one, and this was a big-time performance, even though the competition wasn't there. This field was completely spread-eagled, 10 lengths back to Bracket Buster, another 10 3/4 lengths to Magnitude, another 12.5 lengths to McAfee, and then another 34.5 lengths back to the last place finisher in the race. So this was not the field that put up much resistance for him, right? About 70 lengths front to back. No horse within 10 lengths of each other at the wire. They were completely spread out. And as we mentioned, going into the race in some of our podcasts, our Friday podcasts, and here a week ago, when you look at these horses at 10 furlongs, that's where the good and great get separated. If you're going to upset a great horse like Sovereignty has become, it's probably not going to happen at 10 furlongs unless you are a great horse as well. The upsets would come at something different, something shorter, I should say. And your chance to beat him probably, amongst this 3-year-old group, your chance to beat him was in the Jim Dandy, and they weren't able to do so. They had no chance with this particular field. None of the 4 rivals in this race in the Travers, when we talk about what do we learn, none of these 4 horses ran in either of the Triple Crown races, any of the 3 Triple Crown races. So can you say he is much better now than he was during the Triple Crown Series? It's a difficult step to make because you don't see the same horses running back. Certainly in the Jim Dandy, he was about as comfortable a victor over Baeza as he was in the Triple Crown Series. So in that respect, I would say he had no worse, has held his form from the spring where he won the Derby and won the Belmont. He's held his form at least. Has he moved forward? Again, it's a difficult assessment. Bracket Buster, the runner-up in this race, was beaten 10 lengths at 10 furlongs. But Bracket Buster was beaten 8 lengths in the mile and an eighth Haskell and was fading in the rearview mirror of the winner of that race, Journalism. So when you talk about how good is Sovereignty, the main benchmark amongst the 3-year-olds with him is Journalism, of course. His runner-up in the Derby, his runner-up in the Belmont. Well, they both beat Bracket Buster almost identically because if you stretch the Haskell out over 1.25 miles, in another 220 yards, another eighth of a mile, he probably puts at least 2 more lengths, Journalism, on Bracket Buster, who's fading in that spot. So they both beat Bracket Buster about the same in their summer showcase race. So I don't think there's a big difference between Sovereignty and Journalism now in comparison to what they were in the spring. And in the spring, in those 2 Triple Crown races, the average margin of victory was 2¼ lengths. So you're looking at a horse who's about 2¼ lengths better, Sovereignty, than Journalism at this point. Journalism we'll talk about in a minute. He's got a chance to give us a sense of where he is now late in the summer after the Haskell, as he'll run this coming weekend in the Pacific Classic. So you've got about a 2¼ length margin on those 2 horses, and I don't really know that one has went way north and the other has gone south. So the margin between those 2 horses is still probably about 2 to 3 lengths. If you want to talk looking ahead to the Breeders' Cup, both at 1.25 miles. Now you would get a home game in the Breeders' Cup, knock on wood, with good health for Journalism. Is that home game worth 2 or 3 lengths? Jockey and Umberto Rispoli on Journalism, who rides Del Mar daily, versus Junior Alvarado, rarely appears at Del Mar. In fact, I'd have to look up his main track record at Del Mar, but he's got very few appearances there, obviously, over the years at Del Mar. So you get a jock more familiar with the track. You get a horse more familiar with the track. Is that enough to make up the 2 or 3 lengths when we get to the Breeders' Cup? That's what handicappers will have to decide. But I don't think the margin between Journalism and Sovereignty has ballooned to 5-6 lengths, where a home field advantage or a riding, a better ride over a particular track could make up the difference. I think they're still within that margin of competition where some of those factors will be handicapping considerations. As for Sovereignty, we're not going to see him again until the Breeders' Cup Classic. He will train up to the Breeders' Cup. Bill Mott has basically said there won't be another prep for him, so we would look for him to show up next at Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup, and we'll talk about the situation with Journalism and the other horses in the Classic division in just a bit. Now, training up to the Breeders' Cup for Sovereignty, is that rarefied air? Is that territory too tough to go from the Travers straight into the Breeders' Cup and take on older horses? It worked for Arrogate back in 2016. It worked for American Pharoah in 2015, coming out of the Travers even off a loss. And last year, Sierra Leone also came off a loss in the Travers, didn't have a prep, and then won the Breeders' Cup Classic. So 3 times in the last 7-8 Breeders' Cup Classics, we've seen horses come out of the Travers, take on elders for the first time, and win the Breeders' Cup Classic. So Arrogate, American Pharoah, Sierra Leone, all able to do it. Sovereignty, you would think, is breathing similar air to those kind of horses, certainly to Sierra Leone. And you can make the argument, American Pharoah, Arrogate, he's in that category of top-notch 3-year-olds. I think he's a slight cut below those 2 at this point. But if he goes on and wins the Breeders' Cup Classic, we have a different viewpoint of him, obviously, in that big historical look, as we talked about last week. The best 3-year-olds since 2000, the best 3-year-olds, in the last 20 years or so. I think you're looking at Sovereignty now. I said last week he'd be in that 6, 7, 8 category, 7, 8, 9 area of the best horses since 2000 of the 3-year-olds. If he were to able win the Travers, he did, and he did so emphatically. So I really think he's probably one of the top 6 or 7 2-year-old or 3-year-olds we've seen since 2000. And again, with a chance to move up even farther with an effort in the Breeders' Cup Classic that is befitting of some of those other past champions that we've seen. So really an impressive performance by Sovereignty. Nothing to knock whatsoever off of that effort. The competition wasn't there, but he showed up in a very fast time, got a big speed figure out of it from Byron, some of the other groups. So you would have to think that he is the favorite for this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. We'll see how he does when he takes on some older horses. That segues us to topic number 3. So what did we learn from the Travers? We just went over that. What about the Classic division this week? Well, we've got a couple big races around the country for older horses and 3-year-olds and up at this point, because specifically when we talk about the Pacific Classic, we're talking about Journalism running this Saturday. The entries will come out tonight, a ceremony on Tuesday night at Del Mar for the post-position draw for the Pacific Classic. Journalism, the star 3-year-old and Preakness winner of the Santa Anita Derby, winner over the track at Del Mar, gets back to Del Mar, and here he is working with Phosphorescence in the morning back on the 23rd. That was on Saturday this past week. You can see his final tune-up here for the Pacific Classic, working in company 5 furlongs in a minute flat. Again, we're talking about a horse here, Journalism, who is about 2.5 lengths behind on average behind Sovereignty in his 2 Triple Crown races. The average margin there about 2.25 lengths. Is he on the improve? everything I've seen from his works tell me that the Haskell winner is doing exceptionally well. He may not win the Pacific Classic this weekend, but I don't think it's because he's not going to run his race. He looks to be training exceptionally well coming into this. Again, what we saw with the Haskell performance, we've seen Bracket Buster come back and run second, a distant second, albeit in the short field there in the Travers Stakes. And this weekend, we'll see another horse out of the Haskell running on Saturday in the Nashville Derby. So, you got a couple shots here to see some horses who have run out of the Haskell to see just what Journalism beat when he won at Monmouth. He's galloping out very well in this workout. And I think Journalism will be tough in a field that has several tough horses in here because he's taking on older horses. And when you talk about the older horses in the U.S. game, Fierceness is one you've got to talk about. Fierceness now at age 4 was one of the top 3-year-olds last year when winning the Travers and Jim Dandy, beaten favorite in the Kentucky Derby, but he won the Grade 1 Florida Derby. This year, he hasn't won a Grade 1, but he won the Ali Sheba back in May on Oaks Day at Churchill Downs, beat Most Wanted. He beat a subpar field in that one. Then he stepped up into the Met Mile, a Grade 1 company as the favorite, ran second that day to the since injured Raging Torrent. Second in that race to a sprinter. Then he stretched out and ran a clunker in the Whitney. Backing up, he looked at the top of the stretch. He assumed the lead in between calls and looked like he was going to go on to victory in the Whitney and just stopped inexplicably in that race as the 6-5 favorite. Sierra Leone would rally by him and some others in there. Fierceness needs a bounce-back effort. He's going to head to Del Mar to try to find it. This is the place where last year in the Breeders' Cup Classic, he led in between calls again mid-race, ran a good game second in there behind Sierra Leone, clear Forever Young and others in third. You're looking at Fierceness finishing up here with some steam on Saturday at Saratoga, being asked for a little bit through the wire in the finish out here. Half mile in 47-2, a fast workout time for a Todd Pletcher trainee there at the spa. They're headed out west to San Diego, to Del Mar. And Fierceness is going to look to get a bit of a reclamation project on Saturday. If he can take down Journalism and the next colt we're going to talk about, then Fierceness comes back to the fore of your major Breeders' Cup Classic contenders. That other horse, though, that we want to talk about isn't just any other horse when we're talking for the Pacific Classic on Saturday, because that other horse we're talking about is Nysos. And Nysos is a horse who has done nothing wrong in his career. He has run 6 times for trainer Bob Baffert, 5 wins and a second finished by a neck in the Churchill Downs Handicap in the slop. That was coming off a year-plus layoff. He had been away 15 months, came back and was probably the race of the year and ran a bang-up second when there were 5, 6 Grade 1 type horses all on the wire in the Churchill Downs Handicap. Since then, he beat Dr. Venkman in the Triple Bend. Of course, we saw Dr. Venkman come back here to win last weekend in the Pat O'Brien at Del Mar, a quality opponent when you vanquish Dr. Venkman on the West Coast. And then last time out, Nysos came off about a 2-month break and won handily by 2 3/4 lengths in the San Diego Handicap, beating his stablemate Miramati at 10 cents on the dollar. This workout that we're watching here, 58-4, is an absolute guerrilla work. Nysos coming up to this race in tremendous form. I don't know if he can go a mile and a quarter, right? 2 of his 3 starts this year have been at 7/8 of a mile. 4 or 5 of his 6 career starts have been at a mile or less. Only in the San Diego at a mile and a 16th did he go 2 turns and beyond a mile. Now he's got to go all the way to a mile and a quarter in the Pacific Classic. That is a big ask for Nysos or any horse when you're taking on the likes of Fierceness and you're taking on the finishing power of Journalism. It is going to be a super rendition this year of the Pacific Classic. Can't wait to see that race on Saturday at Del Mar. Again, some of the timing for the week of the Pacific Classic. Tuesday night, a ceremonial post-draw. And then Wednesday, they will draw the remainder of the card for Pacific Classic Day at Del Mar. So by Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, past performances and the full card will be available, and we can get to our handicapping of the Pacific Classic. We'll have full handicapping coverage of that race coming up later this week in our Friday podcast. So be sure to check out the First Call podcast on Friday with myself and Scott Shapiro. We'll handicap not only the Pacific Classic, but 8 stakes races around the country. I can't wait to see the Pacific Classic. The finishing power of Journalism in a mile and a quarter makes me feel like he can really play in here, because there's always been a little bit of a question about Fierceness ability at the mile and a quarter trip. And when you look at Nysos, you know that at a mile and a 16th and maybe even at a mile and an eighth, I think he would have a significant edge against the younger journalism. But at a mile and a quarter, with the finishing ability, those strong, brisk, late pace figures that we've talked about time after time after time, when it comes to journalism, he just keeps coming, which makes the victories where Sovereignty ran by him look even more spectacular, because this horse has been out finishing like no 3-year-old we've seen in a long while on the Triple Crown Trail and through the Triple Crown races, and Sovereignty just went by him twice. If those horses are in his crosshairs, if Nysos and Fierceness don't get away from journalism, and he's got him in their crosshairs at the top of the stretch, think back to the Preakness where he had no quit in him. He just kept coming and coming and coming and coming until he finally got the Gosger. That's the kind of performance I think we might see on Saturday from journalism. But again, a freak performance on the front end from Nysos is not out of the question. And when Fierceness fires his race, Fierceness fires his race. We've seen him win by the length of the stretch in races like the Florida Derby. So Breeders' Cup Juvenile a couple years ago for those bang-up performances out of Fierceness. Sometimes he throws in a total clunker. We don't get that with journalism. We know he's consistent. We haven't gotten that with Nysos. He's been absolutely consistent as well. Again, he is 5 for 6 lifetime. It is going to be a fantastic renewal of the Pacific Classic. Can't wait for that. And that's just one of 2 really good races this weekend in the Classic Division. So let's keep talking about the Breeders' Cup Classic Division, because on Sunday they're going to run the Jockey Club Gold Cup at the end of the Saratoga meet. They ran the Whitney earlier in the meet at Saratoga. Jockey Club Gold Cup extends them out to a mile and a quarter, and Mind Frame is back in that one. And that's why Fierceness is heading to Southern California and out to Del Mar. Fierceness ran a bad race in the Whitney last time out over the track at Saratoga. He's run well at Saratoga in the past, but I think they're just trying to change things up a little bit with him by sending him west. And that also frees up the slot in the gate for the Jockey Club Gold Cup, so Pletcher doesn't have to run against himself with Mind Frame. And Mind Frame's been training as well at Saratoga, as we'll take a look at his workout here from the 24th on Sunday. Plenty of company here as the Todd Pletcher trainees start off on their work. Mind Frame's going to work a half mile in here with Class Assist. He's in the outside with the black cap. So, as we talk about Mind Frame and you check out this workout, this is a horse, Mind Frame, who hasn't run since June 28th when he won the Stephen Foster. He hasn't been beaten since July of 2024. That was only 4 starts back, but the last time he lost was a second-place finish to Dornoch in the Haskell. His only other loss on his career, the second-place finish to Dornoch in the Belmont Stakes. We talk about a record like Nysos. The record for Mind Frame, not much different. 7 starts, 5 wins, 2 seconds. His 2 seconds again to Dornoch in last year's Belmont and Haskell. This year he's won going around 1 turn twice in the Churchill Downs Handicap and in the Gulfstream Park Mile. He stretched back out around 2 turns successfully in a pretty much front-end score with some fairly pedestrian pace for a mile and an eighth at Churchill Downs and the Stephen Foster. He got away with pretty simple fractions that day and was able to hold off Sierra Leone. Can he beat Sierra Leone at a mile and a quarter? And if the pace is a little bit different, Sierra Leone's going to have a rabbit in the race again to try to help him out. So we will see. Can Sierra Leone, last year's Breeders' Cup Classic winner, get back-to-back big scores at Saratoga this meet? Already winning the Whitney. Again, he had the rabbit in the race that day, but in the Whitney, he ran down Highland Falls, disarmed. Fierceness didn't fire in that particular spot. This could be a tougher test to beat Mind Frame, but Mind Frame, Sierra Leone going head-to-head in the Jockey Club Gold Cup on Sunday. When you think about the big 3 running out at Del Mar, we've got Nysos out there, you've got journalism out there, and you've got Fierceness. Then you got 2 really big ones running at Saratoga in Sierra Leone and also Mind Frame. We already have journalism in the clubhouse. Forever Young, a 7th big hitter potentially in the Breeders' Cup Classic Division, 3rd in the Classic last year, of course. Forever Young in Japan is supposed to have 1 prep in October and be ready for the Breeders' Cup a month later. So he is on schedule for a return bid. We could be looking at 6, 7 major hitters into this year's Breeders' Cup Classic Division, 5 of which are on display this weekend. If the distance doesn't work out for Nisos, I still think he's probably a Breeders' Cup horse to the dirt mile, where Baffert would shorten up his trip there. Baffert is not keen on taking on Sovereignty, as we saw in the Travers last week, moving horses out of the Classic division and turning back in sprints. He ran 2 of them in the Jerkins last weekend and didn't send Goal Oriented and some others to go head-to-head with Sovereignty. So Baffert's not in a hurry to go take on Sovereignty with anybody who's questionable. So Nisos is going to have to prove his mettle this weekend at 1.25 miles in order to get that bid towards the Breeders' Cup Classic and take on the division heavyweights. But a win over fierceness and a win over journalism in the Pacific Classic would certainly punch Nisos' ticket to the Classic. But a second or third where the distance might get him, then you might see Nisos as a potential Breeders' Cup dirt mile type. Really exciting weekend in the Breeders' Cup Classic division. One other mention of the Breeders' Cup Classic division, Charlestown Classic last week, Banishing won that race, beating Skippy Longstocking, the 2-time defending champ. Skippy Longstocking's kind of lost a step this year. He's always been a Breeders' Cup dirt mile type horse anyway. I don't think you're going to see Skippy Longstocking obviously moving forward towards the Breeders' Cup Classic. Maybe he will get another shot in the dirt mile. As for Banishing, he's back, I believe. David Jacobson, the trainer, said they are going to give a long look at this Sunday's Jockey Club Gold Cup. So on 8 days rest, he may go from the Charlestown Classic and winning that 7-figure purse and take a shot in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Jockey Club Gold Cup field will be drawn, I believe, today on Tuesday for Saturday. I haven't seen the field yet. White Abario might be in there, Breeders' Cup Classic winner from a couple years ago. He's trying to get back on the beam as well. So a lot shaken in the Classic division. We'll review it all next week, but really exciting times for those runners. Let's go to our fourth topic this week on It's Official, and we go from the Classic division to the filly and mare sprint ranks. And, you know, there are pretty clear-cut leaders in a lot of divisions heading towards the Breeders' Cup in the fall. But as far as the filly and mare sprint ranks go, the division is tilted. But which filly from the West is best? We know the fillies from the West Coast have had their run so far this year. The Derby City Distaff back at Churchill Downs was all about Copian. And this weekend, Hope Road came to the Ballerina. She couldn't beat Copian earlier in the year, but she was able to take down the Grade 1 company at Saratoga for Bob Baffert. Here's Hope Road getting her first Grade 1.
And Scylla turned for home together. Majestic Oops is 5 lengths back in third. They're coming to the 8th pole. Hope Road on the outside is up to take the lead. Scylla fully extended, but back to second as Hope Road starts to pull away. And Majestic Oops continues her rally in the middle of the racetrack. It's Hope Road and Jose Ortiz to win the Resorts World Casino Ballerina convincingly over Scylla. Majestic Oops was third, and Bright Work finished fourth. The final.
Not the strongest field in the filly and mare division when Copian's not there. Trainer Richard Mandela opted to keep her out west. Where will we see Copian? Will she just stay fresh and try to run to the Breeders' Cup Distaff off a long, or Breeders' Cup filly and mare sprint off a long layoff? That seems to be some of the hint right now. So Copian super fast. She handled this filly, Hope Road, in their matchup at Churchill Downs on a neutral track. Both have run and won at Del Mar in the past, so Hope Road would be no surprise there. Bob Baffert got 4 straight wins out of Hope Road, then had 4 hard luck losses against top competition. Now she's back on the beam after that win. She beat the best that is left of the East, and there's not much to talk about amongst the Eastern filly and mare sprinters. Again, they weren't able to hold their ground at Churchill. They weren't able to hold their ground there at Saratoga in the Ballerina. As for the best of the East, she missed another one. Her name is Ways and Means. She was third in that race behind Copian and behind Hope Road at Churchill in the Derby City Distaff, but she was forced to miss this start, her second straight missed start, so she didn't make the gate in the Ballerina for Chad Brown. Ways and Means is one that always takes a lot of money. I believe she was actually favored in last year's Breeders' Cup filly and mare sprint. Can she get back in time for the Breeders' Cup and be a factor? That's a real question mark. So until proven otherwise, it's about the West Coast, because we know how good Copian can be. We just saw Hope Road win there. Wasn't tremendously impressive visually in that race, and I don't think the competition was stellar. But if that's the best the East has in the Ballerina, which traditionally it is each season, That's a good sign for the West Coast. And maybe the best of the West, the filly who beat Copian last time, she was back in action this past weekend, and it was an easy win for the filly Sweet Azteca on Sunday in the Rancho Bernardo at Del Mar. She did it easily as expected, but it'll get tougher for her coming up next time out.
Teca on the outside. Formula Rosa hangs in there at the rail, and it's 8 lengths back to Chismosa, who's catching up to Don't Tell Our Wives. The half was 43.81. They're into the stretch, and Sweet Azteca has now shaken loose. She's in front by 2. Back into second is Formula Rosa, and the other two still well behind. Sweet Azteca and Juan Hernandez are going to win the Rancho Bernardo. Cruising under the wire by 3. Formula Rosa was second.
Big time win there in a fast time. Sweet Azteca, when she's on, she is on. She's 7 for 9 lifetime. She had that race in the Chillingworth last year as a prep towards the Breeders' Cup during the Santa Anita Fall Meet, and everything just fell apart at a short price. She didn't end up making the Breeders' Cup, has only made 2 starts this year, but she's won both of them. She defended her title in the Great Lady M Stakes at Los Alamitos, where she set a track record last time when she beat Copian, and then she came back in this race, the Rancho Bernardo, and defended her title from 2024. She's every bit as good as she was last year, and trainer Mark Glatt says they're probably just going right up to the Breeders' Cup this time, which is what I thought probably was going to be the plan last year. And I was scratching my head, and I remember talking to Jeff about this on the podcast last year, is it made no sense for her to run in the Chillingworth, I thought, as a prep towards the Filly and Mare Sprint. I think you want to go into that race fresh, and I think that's what Mark Glatt's going to do this year. So you've got Sweet Azteca, you got Hope Road winning, both from California in the 2 big races this past weekend. You got Copian awaiting in the wings. The 3 big sprinters in the Filly and Mare Sprint division are all waiting around to see if Ways and Means can muster any competition from the East, but the West definitely looks best when we talk in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint division. Let's go to our 5th and final topic, as it is traditionally each week here on the It's Official podcast. It's our Stars of Tomorrow segment. Certainly an honorable mention to the first-time starter 5 bars for trainer Shug McGahee, but we're going to take you to a place we don't go often in these Stars of Tomorrow segments. Check out the West Virginia bred named Come On Eileen at Colonial Downs on Saturday. She debuts for Brittany Russell, a big-time winner in 109-4.
The battle might be for second, though, as they come by the 8th pole. Come On Eileen and Heavy on Toledo are in front by 5. POSH Posh now up to second, down to the inside Velocity Girl and Sudden Squall, but by the 16th pole, it's all Come On Eileen. Come On Eileen, going to win nicely here on debut by about 8 lengths. POSH Posh was up.
We'll hope that Come On Eileen is not a one-hit wonder for those fans of Dexy's Midnight Runners in the 1980s. Come On Eileen, though, won that race by 9 3/4. The field was spread eagled 49 1/4 lengths over a 6 furlong sprint. That's what you want to see. This 2-year-old filly by Complexity just dusted the competition. We've seen Brittany Russell have a lot of success with horses based in Maryland, in the Mid-Atlantic, being able to ship and be very competitive around the country. Think post time last year in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile division and winning some big races in New York. One of her future stars of tomorrow, Come On Eileen. I think a 2-year-old filly that we're going to want to watch. Maybe she's somebody for the Frizette coming up a little bit later in the fall, and maybe a Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies type to keep an eye on. She's by Complexity. I think she'll go longer. Brittany Russell train. Come On Eileen. Let's go now to review our 5 topics this week on It's Official. These 5 topics include this week's Goosebump Award, where it went to Thorpedo Anna, a hard-fought and exciting victory for her in the Personal Ensign Stakes. What did we learn from the Travers? We learned that there is no weakness in the game of sovereignty. He's not giving anything back that he assumed from the spring, and he may be even stronger now. Next stop, Breeders' Cup Classic after a win in 2 minutes and 4/5, coming home exceptionally strong to win by 10 lengths. And what are we going to learn this weekend about the rest of the Classic division, who could be taking on Sovereignty in that aforementioned Breeders' Cup? Well, you've got the Pacific Classic on Saturday. That draws Tuesday night with fierceness, Nisos, and journalism expected. You've got a Jockey Club Gold Cup on Sunday, where Mind Frames in that one could be taking on any number of competition in there. That includes, of course, last year's Breeders' Cup Classic winner, Sierra Leone, and maybe another Breeders' Cup Classic winner from the past, we will see if White Barrio shows up in that one. The West is proving best in the Filly and Mare sprint ranks. Sweet Azteca rolled in the Rancho Bernardo at Del Mar as expected, and it was Hope Road coming from California to beat New York's best in the Ballerina. And again, we're waiting to see where Copian runs next, probably right to the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. The West looking best in the Filly and Mare Sprint ranks. And our stars of tomorrow. Come on, Eileen. First time starting 2-year-old filly at Colonial Downs on Saturday, winning in 109-4 by nearly 10 lengths for trainer Brittany Russell. Those 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I say so. That's how we play the game, and we'll do it all again next week. I ask for your continued prayers and support for our buddy Jeff Siegel as he recovers from some health issues, and we hope to have Jeff back with us as soon as possible. Get well, my partner. For everybody watching out there, I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast. And, of course, join me on Friday where guest handicapper Scott Shapiro will be alongside for the First Call podcast, where we'll handicap the Pacific Classic, we'll handicap the Jockey Club Gold Cup, all the big races coming up this weekend on that show. Have a great week, everybody.